The plaza at Riverside Civic Center hummed with the ordinary chaos of a Saturday afternoon. Families clustered near the fountain where children chased pigeons and tossed pennies into the chlorinated water. Food trucks lined the eastern edge, their generators adding a low drone beneath the chatter of customers ordering tacos and kettle corn. The spring sun hung at that particular angle that made everything look slightly overexposed, washing the concrete in pale gold and casting long shadows from the oak trees that lined the plaza's western boundary. Nick Martell stood near the pretzel cart with his 7-year-old daughter, Sophie, her small hand wrapped around his calloused fingers as she studied the menu board with the serious intensity of someone making a life-altering decision. He was 41 years old, with grease worked so deep into the creases of his knuckles that no amount of scrubbing could fully remove it. His work shirt was faded blue, the name patch reading Riverside Auto long since worn to illegibility. His jeans had a tear near the left knee that he kept meaning to patch but never did. His boots were steel-toed and scuffed from years of kicking around beneath engine blocks and transmission housings. None of that mattered to Sophie. To her, he was just Daddy, and Daddy had promised her a pretzel with extra salt because it was Saturday and Saturdays belonged to her. That was the rule they had established 3 years ago, after the worst of the grief had passed, after Nick had finally learned how to braid her hair without making her cry, after they had figured out together how to be a family of 2 instead of 3. She was small for her age, with her mother's dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that was already coming loose despite his best efforts that morning. Her eyes were brown and watchful, carrying a depth that sometimes startled him with how much she seemed to understand about the world and its cruelties. On her hip, barely visible beneath her pink t-shirt, sat the insulin pump that had become as much a part of her as her freckles. Type 1 diabetes, diagnosed at 4 years old, 6 months after her mother died. The medication cost $412 a month, and that was with the discount card the pharmacy had helped him find. Every fever, every unusual fatigue, every moment when she seemed pale or shaky sent ice through his veins. He had learned the signs of hypoglycemia the way some fathers learned baseball statistics. He could read his blood sugar in the color of her cheeks, the steadiness of her hands, the brightness of her eyes. But he had learned to carry that fear the way he carried everything else. You held it close, you kept moving, you made sure your daughter got her pretzel on Saturday. The vendor handed over their order, a warm twist of dough glistening with butter and coarse salt, and Nick guided Sophie toward a bench near the fountain where they could eat in peace. She climbed up beside him, her legs swinging above the ground, already picking at the warm dough and the crystals of salt scattered across its surface. Nick sat with his back to the building behind them, facing the open expanse of the plaza. It was an old habit, one he did not think about anymore. He just did it. Position yourself with a wall at your back. Always know your exits. Always watch the crowd. Always be ready for something to go wrong. For a few minutes, everything was normal. Sophie told him about her week at school, about the girl who sat next to her in art class and always borrowed her colored pencils without asking, about the book they were reading that had a dog in it that she was pretty sure was going to die but hoped would not. Nick listened, asked questions, watched her face cycle through emotions with the uncomplicated honesty of childhood. Her hands moved as she talked, animated and expressive, so much like her mother that sometimes it took his breath away. This was what mattered. This was what he had chosen. This ordinary afternoon, this simple pleasure, this child who trusted him completely. Then he noticed the security officers. There were 3 of them positioned at intervals around the plaza's perimeter. They wore the generic uniforms of private security, the kind you saw at malls and corporate buildings, but their postures were wrong. They stood too still, too alert, their eyes scanning the crowd with a focus that had nothing to do with preventing shoplifting or directing lost tourists. Their hands hung at their sides in a particular way, ready to move, ready to reach. Nick's gaze tracked to a 4th figure near the fountain. This one wore a suit, earpiece visible, hand resting casually near his hip where a weapon would be holstered. Federal. The recognition came automatic, unbidden, pulled from a part of his brain he had spent years trying to silence. He knew the posture, the alertness, the particular way federal agents carried themselves when they were on an operation. He had worked alongside men like that in another life. His eyes moved upward, scanning the rooftops, the windows of surrounding buildings, cataloging sight lines and positions with an efficiency that belonged to a different man. Then he heard it. The sound was distant at first, a rhythmic thudding that could have been construction equipment or a delivery truck with a bad suspension. But Nick knew that sound. He knew it in his bones, in the part of him that had never fully left the cockpit of a Black Hawk, in the muscle memory that still sometimes made him reach for controls that were not there. The helicopter emerged from behind the downtown skyline, descending toward the plaza at an angle that made Nick's stomach tighten. It was a UH-60 Black Hawk, military markings visible even at this distance, and it was flying lower than any civilian protocol would allow. Much lower. The kind of low that meant someone had decided rules did not apply to this particular moment. The rotor wash began to affect the plaza before the aircraft had even stabilized. Paper napkins lifted from tables and swirled in sudden eddies. A woman's hat blew off and tumbled across the concrete. The children who had been chasing pigeons stopped and stared upward, their mouths open, their games forgotten. Parents pulled their kids closer, faces turned skyward with expressions mixing confusion and alarm. The food truck vendors stepped out from behind their counters, shielding their eyes against the sun, trying to make sense of what was happening. Sophie looked up from her pretzel. "Daddy," she said, her voice suddenly small, almost swallowed by the growing roar of the rotors. "Daddy, why is there a helicopter?" Nick did not answer. His eyes were tracking the security officers, watching how they had shifted position at the aircraft's approach. They were not surprised. They were not confused. They had been waiting for this. The Black Hawk settled into a hover perhaps 50 feet above the northeast corner of the plaza, its engines holding a steady roar that vibrated through the concrete and into Nick's bones. He watched the pilot make micro-adjustments, keeping the aircraft stable against the light crosswind, and some part of him noted the precision of the movements with professional appreciation. Then he recognized the flight pattern. The particular way the pilot held the hover, the subtle corrections, the rhythm of the adjustments. It was as distinctive as a fingerprint to anyone who had spent enough time in the cockpit. Nick knew that pattern. He had flown alongside it for 6 years. Then the security officers began to move. They converged on his position with coordinated efficiency, approaching from 3 directions simultaneously, cutting off the exit routes that Nick had already identified and cataloged without conscious thought. Their movements were professional, practiced, the kind of coordination that came from training and repetition. Nick felt Sophie press closer to his side, her small body tensing with fear she did not fully understand. Her pretzel fell to the ground, forgotten, scattering salt across the concrete. The lead officer stopped 5 feet away. He was perhaps 40, with the build of someone who had once been athletic and had maintained enough discipline to avoid going soft. His expression was professionally neutral, revealing nothing, but his eyes moved constantly, assessing, calculating. "Mr. Martell," he said. His voice was calm, quiet enough that the surrounding crowd could not hear over the helicopter noise. "I need you to come with us, please." Nick did not move. His hand rested on Sophie's shoulder, holding her close, feeling the rapid flutter of her heartbeat through her thin shirt. Her breathing had quickened. Her hand gripped his arm with desperate intensity. "What is this about?" The officer's expression did not change. "If you could just come with us, sir. We can discuss the details somewhere more private." Nick looked at the other officers, at the federal agent by the fountain who had begun walking in their direction with purposeful strides, at the Black Hawk maintaining its impossible hover above the plaza. He felt the weight of attention pressing down on him, the awareness that something had found him after 7 years of careful anonymity. "What about my daughter? She stays with me." The officer hesitated. That was the first crack in his professional composure, and Nick caught it immediately. A flicker of uncertainty, a glance toward the federal agent, a slight shift in weight that suggested he was operating outside the boundaries of what he had been briefed. "That will not be possible, sir." then we have a problem. The federal agent arrived. He was younger than Nick expected, mid-30s, with a kind of clean-cut appearance that suggested a career spent more in conference rooms than in the field. His credentials were already in his hand, held up for Nick to see. The badge caught the afternoon light. "Mr. Martell, I am Agent Crawford with the Department of Justice. You are not under arrest. We simply need to ask you some questions regarding an ongoing investigation." Nick looked at the credentials, then at the agent's face, reading the micro-expressions that most people never learn to see. Nervousness beneath the professional calm, uncertainty about the parameters of his own mission, the particular tension of someone operating outside their comfort zone and trying very hard not to show it. "Your helicopter is violating about 6 different FAA regulations right now." Nick's voice was conversational, almost casual. "It is also scaring my daughter, and probably half the families in this plaza. Every phone out here is recording. Is that part of your operational plan?" Crawford's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Sir, if you could just cooperate, we can resolve this quickly and quietly. My daughter stays with me." Nick's voice had not changed, had not risen, but something in its quality made 2 of the security officers shift their weight backward, an instinctive response to a threat they could not quite identify. "She is 7 years old. She has a medical condition that requires constant monitoring. Whatever questions you have, you can ask them with her present, or you can arrest me and we can let the lawyers sort out why you needed a Blackhawk to detain a mechanic in a public plaza." There was a long moment of silence, filled only by the rhythmic thunder of the helicopter above. Crawford's eyes moved to Sophie, who had buried her face against Nick's side, her small hands gripping his shirt with desperate intensity. Her shoulders were shaking with silent tears. Then Crawford's eyes moved back to Nick, and something flickered behind them. Recognition, perhaps, or uncertainty, or the dawning awareness that this situation was not going according to whatever plan had been briefed. "Fine," Crawford said. "She stays, but you come with us now." Nick looked at his daughter. "Sophie, sweetheart, look at me." She raised her face and he saw the fear there, bright and terrible in her brown eyes. But beneath it he saw something else. Trust. The absolute certainty that her father would make this right, whatever this was. The same trust her mother had shown him in those final weeks when the treatment stopped working and the hospice nurses spoke in hushed tones about comfort and dignity and letting go. "We are going to go with these men for a little while, okay? They have some questions they need to ask Daddy, but everything is going to be fine, I promise." Sophie studied his face with the penetrating clarity of a child who had learned to read adults out of necessity. Her mother had died when she was 3. She had grown up with a father who sometimes went quiet for no reason, who sometimes stared at nothing, who sometimes held her too tight when he said goodnight. She knew when something was wrong. She always knew. "Are we in trouble?" "No, baby." Nick forced a smile he did not feel. "We are not in trouble. We are just going to have a conversation." Sophie nodded slowly, but she did not look away from his face. Her hand found his and gripped it with desperate intensity. The fear was still there, but something else was emerging alongside it. Determination, courage. "Okay, Daddy. I will be brave. That is my girl." Nick stood lifting Sophie to his hip, keeping her close against his chest. He looked at Crawford. "After you." They walked across the plaza toward a black SUV that had materialized near the eastern edge, its engine running, windows tinted dark. The crowd had begun to notice something unusual happening, phones emerging from pockets, curious faces turning in their direction. The Black Hawk overhead adjusted its position, maintaining coverage as they moved. Nick kept his eyes forward, his posture calm, his movements unhurried. But every instinct he had spent years trying to bury was screaming that something was very wrong. They did not reach the SUV. Halfway across the plaza, a sound cut through the helicopter noise, sharp and electronic. A tone that Nick recognized from a different lifetime. Crawford stopped walking. His hand went to his earpiece, his face draining of color as he listened to whatever was being transmitted. His composure cracked completely, revealing something raw and frightened beneath. He looked up at the Black Hawk, then at Nick, and for the first time Nick saw genuine fear in his eyes. "Mr. Martell," he said slowly, "please do not move." Nick did not move. He stood perfectly still in the middle of the Riverside Civic Center Plaza, his daughter pressed against his chest, while above them the Black Hawk began to descend again, breaking every protocol that governed aircraft operations in civilian airspace. The pilot's name was Michael Torres. He was 38 years old, with 12 years in Army aviation and a combat record that included 3 deployments to Afghanistan and 1 to Syria. He had flown countless missions in conditions that would have broken lesser pilots, had earned commendations and medals that sat in a box in his closet because he did not believe in displaying such things. He had also spent the last 7 years trying to forget a single night in a valley whose name was redacted from every official record when everything had gone wrong and 3 men had died because of orders that came too late. He had not expected that night to follow him here, to a routine domestic support mission in a plaza full of civilians eating pretzels in the spring sunshine. But when he looked down through the Blackhawk's windscreen and saw the face of the man being detained, the recognition hit him like a physical blow. He knew that face. He had served with that face. He had survived a nightmare with that face, had carried the weight of what happened alongside that face, had signed the classified documents that were supposed to ensure neither of them ever spoke of it again. Warrant Officer First Class Nicholas Martell, call sign Shepard. The best combat pilot Torres had ever flown with, and the man who had refused to sign the final version of the after-action report that blamed pilot error for what had really been a command failure of catastrophic proportions. Torres keyed his mic. "Command, this is Raven 6. Request clarification on mission parameters." The response came back clipped and immediate. Raven 6 maintain current position, await further instruction. Torres looked at his co-pilot, a young captain named Williams who had been with the unit for less than a year. Williams' face was tight with confusion, his eyes moving between the instruments and the scene below. "Sir, we are way outside normal flight envelope for this airspace. FAA is going to have questions. Media is going to have questions. I am aware." Torres's hands were steady on the cyclic, but his mind was racing through possibilities, implications, consequences. "Command, what is the identity of the detainee?" A pause. Long enough to be significant. "Raven 6, that information is classified. Maintain position." Torres felt something cold settle in his chest. He had heard that tone before, that particular quality of deflection that meant the mission parameters had changed in ways that no one wanted documented. He had heard it in that valley in the moments before everything fell apart. Williams was staring at him now. "Sir, something is wrong here. This does not feel like a standard support operation." "I know. What do we do?" Torres did not answer immediately. Below, he could see the security team closing around Martell, could see the federal agent speaking into his earpiece with increasing agitation, could see the small child pressed against her father's chest, a little girl with dark hair, maybe 7 or 8 years old, clearly terrified. He thought about the documents he had signed 7 years ago. He thought about the 3 men who had died because someone in a command center had prioritized deniability over their lives. He thought about all the times since then when he had told himself that following orders was the right choice, that the system worked if you trusted it. He thought about what trusting it had cost. Torres keyed his mic. "Command, I am declaring a safety hold. We have exceeded operational parameters for civilian airspace. I am observing potential crowd safety issues below." The response was immediate and sharp. "Raven 6, negative on the safety hold. Maintain position and await instruction. This is a direct order." Torres reached up and switched off the comm channel. The sudden silence in his headset was deafening. Williams' eyes went wide. "Sir, you cannot just cut command. They will ground you. They will convene a review board. You could lose everything." "Watch me." Torres began adjusting the collective, bringing the Blackhawk into a slow climb. "Whatever is happening down there, we are not going to be part of it." "Sir, they will end your career. Then let them review. He pulled back on the cyclic, and the Blackhawk began to climb away from the plaza, away from whatever operation was unfolding below. Below, Crawford was arguing into his earpiece, his composure finally cracking under the pressure of whatever he was hearing. The security officers had formed a loose perimeter around Nick and Sophie, their hands hovering near their weapons, uncertainty written across their faces. They had been briefed for one scenario and were living through another. The crowd had realized that something unusual was happening. Phones were everywhere now, recording everything, and the helicopter's sudden climb had only intensified the public attention. A news drone appeared from somewhere, hovering at the edge of legal airspace, its camera lens catching the afternoon light. Nick stood at the center of it all, his daughter pressed against his chest, his face revealing nothing. But his mind was working at a speed he had not experienced in years. Torres was pulling back. That meant something had changed, something significant enough to override whatever orders he had been given. It meant that at least one person in this operation had decided that what was happening was wrong. Crawford ended his call. His face was pale, his composure gone. He looked at Nick with an expression that was almost desperate. "Mr. Martell, the nature of this operation has changed. You are free to go. We apologize for any inconvenience." Nick did not move. "What operation?" Crawford's jaw tightened. "I am not at liberty to discuss the details. You are free to go. My daughter has been terrified." Nick's voice was still calm, still measured, but there was steel beneath it. "I have been detained in public without explanation. A military helicopter broke a dozen regulations hovering over a civilian plaza. There are 100 phones recording this. And you expect me to walk away without any answers?" Crawford looked at the phones surrounding them, at the crowd that had grown silent and watchful, at the Blackhawk climbing toward a safer altitude. His options were narrowing by the second. "Mr. Martell, please. This is not what I was told it would be. I am asking you to help me minimize the damage here. I want 3 things. 1, a public record of this detention with timestamp. 2, the names of whoever authorized this sent to my attorney within 48 hours. 3, my daughter gets to finish her pretzel in peace." Crawford's mouth opened, then closed. "I can give you 1 and 3. The second is above my authority. Then call someone with the authority." "Mr. Martell." The voice came from behind him. Nick turned. A woman in her 50s, silver hair cropped short, wearing a navy blazer over a white blouse. She carried no visible credentials, nothing that would identify her role. But she moved through the security perimeter without hesitation, and no one attempted to stop her. "My name is Director Chen. I believe we need to have a conversation." Nick looked at her steadily. "Which agency?" "That is classified. Everything about this seems classified." "That is a problem, Director, because classified operations involving the detention of American citizens in public tend to become unclassified when cell phone footage hits the internet. You are more informed than your current employment would suggest. I fix cars. That is my whole life now." "Is that what you are?" Chen's voice dropped. "Because 7 years ago you were something else entirely, and the file we received suggested you might be willing to revisit that conversation." Nick felt the past pressing against him. "I am a father. That is what I am now. Whatever conversation you want, have it with my lawyer." He turned and walked toward the edge of the plaza. Sophie held close. No one stopped him. His truck was a 2006 Ford F-150, rust spreading along the wheel wells, engine burning oil. His father's truck. He strapped Sophie into her booster seat, checking the seatbelt 3 times. Then he sat behind the wheel, staring at nothing. "Daddy." Sophie's voice was small. "Are we okay?" "Yeah, baby, we are okay. Those men were scared of you. I saw it." Nick's hands tightened on the wheel, then relaxed. "They were confused, sweetheart. Different thing. The lady with gray hair knew something about you. She thinks she knows something. That was a long time ago, before you were born." 15 minutes later, they were home. Small apartment, ordinary building. On the wall, a photograph showed a woman with dark hair holding a newborn while a younger Nick stood beside her. Claire, Sophie's mother. the woman who made him promise to be there for their daughter, to choose presence over everything else. He had kept that promise 7 years. That night, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. The voice was quiet, familiar. "Shepard, it is Torres. We need to talk." Murphy's Bar had served Riverside's working people for 40 years. Scarred wood, country jukebox, dim lighting. Nick sat in a back booth, water in front of him. Torres arrived at 8, wearing uncomfortable civilian clothes. He slid into the booth. 7 years, Torres finally said. 7 years, 2 months, 16 days. Not that I was counting. You look different. We both are. Torres studied Nick's face. You are still flying, and you are fixing cars. I thought you went ghost, changed your name. I just stopped being the person who answered to it. You recognized my flight pattern from the ground. I know how you hold a hover like my own heartbeat. When you pulled back, I knew something changed. Torres' jaw tightened. The mission brief said you were a person of interest, national security, cooperation expected, civilian comfort secondary. They wanted me silenced. Torres's voice dropped. The valley, Shepard. This is about the valley. Nick felt cold settle in his chest. Someone reopened the investigation 3 months ago. Full review. I did not know until today. Why reopen it now? Because you never signed. Torres's eyes met his. You were the only one who refused. As long as that refusal exists, someone might ask what really happened. Nick remembered that night with terrible clarity. 3 Blackhawks, standard formation, route cleared by intelligence. Except the intelligence was wrong. Anti-aircraft assets had moved overnight. Someone sold the flight plan. The first Blackhawk was hit before anyone knew. The second went down hard. Nick's aircraft avoided the initial barrage, but extracting survivors became chaos. 3 men died: Rodriguez, Patterson, Williams. They died because someone prioritized political timeline over intelligence verification. The official report blamed pilot error. It was a lie. Nick refused to sign. The others eventually did. Pressure was immense. Careers on the line. Everyone broke except Nick. He turned in his wings 3 months later, started over, but the unsigned refusal remained in his file, a loose end. So what happens now? When I pulled back today, I probably ended my career. Review board coming. You could still cooperate. I have spent 7 years pretending that Valley never happened. Torres looked at him. 7 years knowing 3 good men died because someone cared more about politics than their lives. I am done pretending. They want me to sign, close the file forever. Torres reached into his pocket, a challenge coin worn from years of handling. I have been keeping records, notes about that night, intelligence failures, orders that came too late. He slid the coin across, enough that if anyone wants to bury this, they bury both of us. Nick picked up the coin. He thought about Sophie, her drawings, Claire's photograph. Then he thought about Rodriguez, 23, girlfriend pregnant. She was going to surprise him when he got back. Patterson, 31, just made crew chief. First mission as leader. Williams, 42, 2 kids, coached their soccer. He closed his fist around the coin. Okay, let us talk about what comes next. 3 weeks later, Nick sat in a gray hearing room. Fluorescent lights, long table. 3 officials with neutral expressions. Torres sat beside him. Director Chen spoke first. This review concerns documents from an operation 7 years ago, documents you declined to sign. We are prepared to offer resolution. Nick waited. In exchange for your signature on the original after-action report, all references to your refusal will be expunged. Additionally, compensation. She named a figure covering Sophie's medication for 20 years. Administrative obstacles regarding your daughter's coverage would be removed. Nick felt something move in his chest. Everything he had fought for since Sophie's diagnosis, all he had to do was sign. Confirm a lie. Let Rodriguez, Patterson, and Williams rest beneath official narrative. He looked at Torres. Tension showed in the pilot's shoulders. Torres had ended his career to be here. No, Nick said. Chen's composure flickered. 7 years ago, 3 men died because someone prioritized political convenience over their lives. The official report blamed pilot error. It was a lie. I refused to sign then. I will not sign now. Consider the consequences carefully. I have considered them for 7 years. Sophie is 7. Someday she will ask what kind of man I am. Whether her father stands up or backs down. He leaned forward. I will not teach her truth is negotiable. I will not show her integrity has a price. I will not raise her believing some lies are too big to correct. Chen studied him. The men who died. You knew them. Rodriguez was 23, girlfriend pregnant. She never told him. Patterson just made crew chief. So proud. Williams was the pilot, 42, 2 kids, coached their soccer. They died because someone made a mistake no one wanted to admit. Their families were told lies. I am not asking for revenge, just acknowledgment. Chen was quiet a long time. A colleague returned with a folder. Mr. Martell, there is another option, a supplemental investigation. Newly discovered evidence suggesting original findings may have been incomplete. It would acknowledge factors beyond pilot error may have contributed. Families would receive updated notifications, official record amended, and the cover-up, no prosecution. But actions would be documented, names in the file. Someday someone might read it and understand. Nick looked at Torres. Is that enough? It is not justice, but it is acknowledgement. Sometimes that is all we can ask. He turned to Chen. We accept. The sun was setting when Nick walked out. Orange and pink sky. Torres walked beside him. I do not know how to thank you. You were there when it mattered. That is what counts, what happens now. Now I go home to my daughter, make dinner, check her blood sugar, tell her everything is okay. Torres smiled slightly. That sounds right. It is the only thing that matters. They shook hands. 2 men who had carried the same weight 7 years, finally setting it down. Sophie was waiting at the window when he pulled into the parking lot. She waved and something in Nick's chest expanded with warmth that no money could replicate. She ran to him when he stepped inside. He lifted her into his arms, breathed in the scent of her shampoo. Daddy, you were gone a long time, I know, baby. But I am here now. I am always here now. Did you help someone today? Nick thought about Rodriguez and Patterson and Williams, about their families who would receive amended notifications. Yeah, sweetheart, I think maybe I did. That is good. Helping people is important. It is the most important thing. He held her close, watching light fade from the windows. The weight he had carried felt different now. Lighter, shared, acknowledged. That night, after Sophie slept, Nick stood looking at Claire's photograph. I kept my promise, he said quietly. I was there. Today I showed her what it means to be brave. He touched the frame, then checked on Sophie one more time, watching her sleep, watching the insulin pump do its quiet work. This was his life now. A father and daughter, small apartment in an ordinary town, the daily choice to show up, be present, love without reservation. Sometimes we look at people and see only what they show us. Worn clothes, calloused hands, jobs that do not impress. We assume and move on, never knowing what lies beneath. But beneath every ordinary exterior might be an extraordinary story, a sacrifice no one witnessed, a truth worth more than comfort. Nick Martell was a mechanic making $19 an hour, driving a rusted truck, picking his daughter up every day. He was also a man who refused to sign a lie, who taught his daughter integrity was not negotiable. He had been both things. He would always be both things. He chose to be a father every morning, every evening, every moment that mattered. And perhaps that was the most heroic thing of all, not missions making history, not classified documents, just the simple sacred act of being there, showing up. Loving someone so completely you would walk away from everything else just to watch her grow. Sophie would never fully understand what her father sacrificed, but she would know he was there. She would know she was loved. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. Subscribe if you believe real heroes do not need recognition. They just need someone to come home to. Comment, Shepard, if you think Nick Martell deserves his piece. Remember, next time you look at someone thinking you know their story, you probably do not. Everyone has a battle they are fighting. Everyone has a reason to be brave. Sometimes the bravest thing is simply choosing truth when the lie would be easier.